So today we have our conversation with Nelson Pass, and here we go. Hopefully, Nelson, I know you've done this many times over the years, and some of this will be repeat information for certainly for some people here, but for some of us who don't really have much of a history on your background and how you started on all this, I'm hoping you would reiterate some of that. Um, in terms of what I'd like you to talk about today, if possible, would be a little bit about your history and you're starting at Davis. By the way, I started the year you graduated in 74. Great campus, had a lot of friends in the physics department there. Anyway, um, we'll talk about a little bit about your history, at Davis with ESS and Threshold, and then the starting of Pass Labs. And then maybe talk a little bit about what you would consider some of your real past and current innovations at Pass, and maybe touch upon what's new and upcoming. Okay.
When I got a driver's license at age 16, the first thing that I did was drive downtown and buy a pair of what would be considered kind of car audio grade speakers these days, but they were just a pair of drivers that I had seen in this store. I didn't have a hi-fi yet, but I lusted after these pair of 8-inch full rangers, and it would have been let's see, this would have been 1966, 67. And so I had a driver's license, as I said. So my father had a business at the airport in Sonoma County, which is now known as not the Snoopy Airport, but the guy who did the strip. And he had what is now the Jet Building, which was a World War II hangar, absolutely ginormous wooden hangar, all glass. Uh, and it had to be that way because the naval planes back then had these incredibly tall um, tails. And so it had to be 3 stories high to fit any of them in there. So he had a business there called Redwood Aviation. And in there, and I had a job with him, and in there they had a complete shop for anything that you might want to do. And I started out initially with these speakers, putting them in cardboard boxes, and discovered that it wasn't really that satisfactory. I began lusting after something better, but didn't have the shekels to buy better drivers. But I did have the opportunity to build some wooden cabinets. Okay. And I had these things hooked up to a little portable, turntable, compact player. But now I had better speakers, and but shortly after that, I went to Radio Shack and I bought an amplifier for $29. It was just a little integrated with a volume control and I don't even recall if it had a selector switch or not. I think it must have. So um, I had that, and suddenly I'm a guy with components at age 16, and I proceeded to put a tweeter in the boxes, and every improvement I made, and then I got a Girard turntable, something considerably better than what I had, and there I was. I became hooked. So I got through high school building. I always loved to build stuff. I mean, that was actually, I built one damn thing after another. And I had a couple of neighbors who were of like mind, who were at my age also. And so together we were building a lot of stuff after a bit. Slot car tracks, uh, forts in trees. It really didn't matter. And so it just seems to have been in my blood, and it stayed that way. Uh, when I got to Davis, uh, I started meeting guys who had bigger budgets for hi-fi. I had a guy who quickly became my friend who had absolutely ginormous JBL loudspeakers that he had built the enclosures himself, but he bought the drivers. Like at that point, I was upgrading, and I could only afford a pair of uh, of Utah 12s with it has a tweeter coaxially mounted in the center, and we were off to the races. The following year, I moved into an apartment with this same crowd, and all of a sudden it was really crazy because we had four systems in the same living room. And if you call it these apartments living rooms, I wouldn't grace them with that much of a description. Um, but we would get together and go, let's go drop some stereo. And there we were playing oftentimes the same cut through all the systems at once, and just craziness.
Was that like the first quad system? I'm just joking.
Well, I suppose that, as I say, there was no differentiation between what was coming through any of the stereo pairs, however. So there was that kind of thing. And then, oh, geez, this just kept going. Meanwhile, I was getting a degree in physics and doing quite well. And I had a nice job in the physics department. And also, I had a nice job over in the engineering department. And well, that was my life. But I ran into a guy named Pete Wehrbeck, and he was a friend of a friend, and he was like a light year ahead of where I was. I was still just fooling around with stuff. Like I said, I was fooling around. I built an oscilloscope to watch hi-fi sound out of an old TV set. I commandeered the little electromagnets on either side of the tube and embedded audio signal, and I'll be damned if I didn't have a real oscilloscope. It was so good, somebody bought it off of me. Uh, but meanwhile, I met this other guy uh, who introduced me to Pete Wehrbeck, who was it's hard to describe, but he was probably one of the very smartest people I have ever met. Um, and he was building amplifiers from scratch. And that was just very, very appealing. So far I'd been doing speakers and fooling around and building things like that oscilloscope or Jacob's ladders, all sorts of toys. But he was doing really serious stuff, and you just took a look at what he was doing. It was completely and totally from scratch, his own boards, everything. Now, in 1970, that for me was just like totally amazing. Um, so I got to know those guys as well, and once again, we were fooling around with a lot of things. And Pete got a job with a company that was a startup called ESS. And they decided, and they had not encountered the Heil transformers yet. ESS was originally electrostatic sound systems, and they kind of patterned what they were doing after what Infinity was doing at the time, which were big electrostatic. Because Infinity initially was big electrostats. So ESS started making their own versions of big electrostats, and they hired me to basically design boxes and crossovers and stuff like that. Because it's one of those, hey, you're a bright kid, and we're hiring, and Pete says that you're okay. So suddenly I was employed, and really employed in the audio industry.
But Nelson, you were still going to school at Davis at the time, correct?
Yes, but I had to support myself as well.
Right, but was this company ESS, were they in Sacramento or close by, or were you just doing stuff?
They were in Sacramento,
Okay.
but the girl I was living with had a car.
Ah,
So what I did is I went to school by day and I worked at ESS by night. Um, and well, I suddenly had an income, and not only that, but I was doing what I really wanted to be doing anyways. And and I even had enough time left over to build a loudspeaker that became known. It was named the Claw. It was kind of a legend. It was a straight horn, 9 feet long, and it opened up into a 9 by 9 foot. No, I think it was 7 foot by 7 foot diameter mouth. It's absolutely huge. It took over the entire lounge of the of the of the, uh, of the building that I was staying in at that time, and it became it became kind of a local wonder because we would trot it out. It was powered by JBL 15-inch woofer, had a 375 compression driver with its own horn. It was biamped. I mean, we were starting to really go places with this, and it ended up showing up at events, concerts, things like that. Eventually, the last time that oh yeah, and every time that we fired it up, the cops came. Even the occasion where we pointed out into a field at Davis, where what is now the Vet Med Center was just being constructed. And it was this gray thing way off in the distance. I mean, we pointed it in that direction, and 10 minutes later, the cops showed up because they got a complaint from about a mile away. So we once, though, assembled the claw at ESS for a big party that they were having. And that was when the guys at ESS decided that perhaps I was actually crazy. But I got, I got to know more ladies as a result of that event. And right about this time at ESS, I also met my wife. Uh, and so there's a happy tale there that goes back 50 something years. Let's see. Yeah, almost. Uh, uh, well, let's see. I'm going up
Where,
74.
where did Oscar Heil come into the picture at ESS?
Yes, I'm missing part of the story.
Okay.
Oscar, not long after I joined DSS, Oscar Heil comes knocking on the door, and he's got the loudspeaker, and he's got it in his hands, and he's holding a patent, and he just simply wanted to find somebody who would build this for him. Oscar wasn't actually what I'd call a money-oriented or even ambitious guy, but he'd invented this thing and he wanted to see it built, and he picked ESS to go knock on the door. Immediately, things changed wildly at ESS. All of a sudden, everything else was off the table, and we were developing speakers around Heil transformers, also working with refining the process of manufacturing them reliably. And meanwhile, too, at this time, ESS decided to get into electronics, and Pete Wehrbeck, who was already working there, designed a very nice, quite sophisticated power amplifier and preamp to as part of their product offerings. In that process too, he continued to coach me and hand me parts and say, "Here, try this," and so on and so forth. So I was becoming more and more sophisticated with this. And I eventually, just while I was still at ESS, uh, I built my first amplifier that I ever designed from scratch. And it was, I mean, I had done kits and I'd modified stuff and I'd played around, but this one was from scratch. And it was the first example of a non-switching amplifier. Uh, it later became the basis for the initial threshold products, um, and became very popular in Japan in terms of manufacturing, so that suddenly there was a whole flood of non-switching amplifiers. And I got a patent for that. That was my first patent. So here I am at ESS, and things were, and I might add, I met my wife also at ESS. I think I mentioned that, but also that she was in charge for quite a while. She was in charge of the quality assurance of the folding of the diaphragms of the Heils. And from there, she graduated into being head of quality assurance throughout ESS. Um, Anyways, she's a sweetheart. So, but here I am at ESS, and uh, everything revolved around getting Heil designs designed and out. Um, I have to say that the guys who ran the couple of people who ran ESS, one in particular who was president of the company, we didn't get along all that well. And meanwhile, too, ESS was becoming more ambitious in terms of who they thought they were or were going to be. So basically, they began hiring people, say, out of Bell Labs or people with reputations for having worked in the industry in some way. And these were professional people, not like not like the clowns that they started out with. Um, my opinion is that this was a mistake. In any case, they decided that they had professional people now, they could let me go. And
Ah,
meanwhile, Pete, who had designed their electronics, they decided that other people could clean up his work for him. Um, and so he became not enamored with his position. They fired me, but Pete quit. And in my humble opinion, at that particular time, that was ESS at its absolute peak, and they had grown a lot, and they it became really an army of employees in a large building, a lot of volume, a lot of activity. That was the peak of ESS, and about I think it was about 2 years later they declared bankruptcy. Um,
and how soon after getting fired did you go ahead and form Threshold?
oh yeah, I took a long weekend off, and the marketing director at ESS decided that he had the money to support this an effort with me, and so we formed a partnership, and that was Threshold. And I was in at the time living in a little house in Sacramento, and I had a room to myself in a garage, and I began designing what became the Threshold 800A. That is to say, I designed the circuit. Um, Renee Besnay, my partner, was a very talented guy in terms of graphic design. After all, and he did a lot of the graphic design associated with everything, plus the styling of products. And so between he and I, we cobbled together a really nice prototype of an amplifier. We trotted it around and got a really positive response from dealers. This was back when there were a lot of dealers, but we went on the road with it, and we got commitments from people, and we went back to the apartment and began building amplifiers.
And what's your first circuit design for that first Threshold amp? That was a Class A non-switching amp. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was Class A in the sense that the output stage and all the signal carrying semis were operated in a forward bias at all times.
Okay.
There were some people going, well, it's not really Class A. And then the other ones go, well, not, it's kind of Class A, and things like that. But in point of fact, it was a big hit. We had a lot of business, and very very shortly after that, we had quite a few competitors.
Right.
Um,
And when did you start to put, and once you started Threshold, you developed your stasis amps. And was that much later in the history of Threshold, or was that relatively starting early on?
I'd have to look. We're talking about stuff that for me is, I guess, we're going back 50 years.
Well, for a
Um,
lot of us, things are 50 years old. So,
yeah, uh, for a year or two, we were building versions of. There was the 800A, and then there was a smaller version called the 400A. There was a Cascode amplifier, which was uh, not designated as a class amplifier, but it was unique in that it was all the semiconductors that were carried signal were cascoded, so that they were held at a constant voltage from, in the case of bipolars, emitter to collector, and that gives you some benefits, and not the least of which is it makes it easier to run those things in Class A because there's a lower constant voltage across them. So that was the CAS one. Um, we just simply made a progression of those products and sold them for a number of years. At some point, and I'd have to go burrowing through my computer to see exactly when the Stasis One was developed.
And was Stasis One a particularly different circuit design, or was it just kind of like the next iteration, but you gave it the Stasis name for whatever reason?
No, actually, that was an entirely new design.
Okay.
It had a constant bias, not a variable bias, which was the basis for having the non-switching amps. It had a constant bias. It had well, these things always started out as we built the biggest one first, and they had ginormous output stages. I was impressed early on in my career by Ron Dunlap of Dunlap Clark, and I was at a I was at a and this was even before Threshold. I was at a CES convention, and I was sitting there with some reps at a dinner, and one of them was telling, he goes, "Oh, well, I ran across this brand called Dunlap Clark. They've got this amplifier, and it's got the most gargantuan output stage you ever saw in your life. Oh, it's so huge." And this guy was so crazed over the fact that it had a monstrously big output stage. I went, that sounds like the ticket. I think I'm going to be building larger output stages if that's the reaction of potential customers. It turned out that it kind of did. It kind of was. And years later, and I got to meet Ron Dunlap. What a great guy, really a terrific guy. But when I finally, years later, actually took a good look inside of a Dunlap Clark amp, I realized it had 6 output devices. And I was using, I don't know, I was getting up into 16, 20 per channel, larger even, 24 per channel. And of course, that was a big help. The semiconductors back then weren't as robust as they are now. These were bipolars. A lot of them had some of your smaller dies if you wanted a faster chip, and also they were less expensive because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But they couldn't dissipate as much juice. They didn't have as large a safe operating area as well. So cascoding was a technique where you could share the voltage out with other parts, with other transistors, so that they're in series, but one kind of acts like almost like uh, a shield against the supply voltage, and holds the output devices in this case and elsewhere through the circuit at relatively constant voltages from collector to emitter, which locks the gain in on one parameter and lowers the distortion. So it's not only can you bias these things higher and run more power through the whole aggregate, but holding them at constant voltage solves all sorts of problems with bias drift, lower distortion, bandwidth gets better. So that became something that was important to me. And the Cas1 was a product that cascoded all the parts, and it really delivered the goods. It was a modest little amplifier. I think it was about 70 watts a channel, but it was a sweetheart.
And at some point, Nakamichi, did they reach out to you, or did you reach out to them? And because they took on you had a relationship, right? They took on the Stasis amps.
Well, this is later in the story. Give me. I've got go through one thing, and then now the thing is that cascoding was such a success that I'm looking at. Okay, you lock the voltage across the gain devices to a relative constant, and it gets better. If you can do the same kind of a trick with the current, you would end up with almost perfect devices. All of a sudden, you don't need feedback, you don't need anything. You just you run a lot of current through a cascoded circuit, and Bob's your uncle. Well, running a lot, your question asks is, well, where does the power gain, the power delivery come from in such a system? Well, what I did is I developed current source which augmented the output device independently, and so it took, while leaving the original output stage connected to the load, it nevertheless began carrying some of the current, augmenting that output, doing so in a linear fashion. And the result was that the distortion dropped even further, and it got to the point where we were just simply we were able to run it the output stages without feedback loops around them.
Mhm.
So the stasis amp was basically that. I applied for a patent on that and got it. Um, and the situation with Nakamichi actually ultimately came down to well, this is a company that was always underfunded, and it was in a lot of ways it was very hand to mouth. Even when times were good, expenses were high, and so it was difficult to it was a bit of a struggle. We took on a business partner, however, by the name of Joe Sammet, who in, well, first off, I got to know him because I was introduced to him because he was the craziest audiophile in the Bay Area by reputation, and backed it up by spending large amounts of money. But he was from the gambling industry. He came from a family that ran casinos. But he was also, well, first off, a wonderful guy, an incredibly great guy. But he was the sharpest pair of ears I have ever run into. I could, I could do, I could, I could develop any kind of a circuit and run it past him, and he would go, "Well, this is what's good about this, and this is what's not so good. This is where you need. This is where it needs work." And or he would say things like, "Well, this one here is really quite good. This one over here, it needs a little help." So not only that, but he was an unbelievable businessman, an unbelievable marketer, a salesman, and he had money to invest. So he came in as the third partner, um, and that alleviated all of our problems. We really the whole thing really took off and began doing very well. The years go by, and well, sometimes relationships get strained. It was three people, and it became apparent that one of them had one somebody had to leave, and the other two could go on with that. And in my case, I had to make a choice between Renee and Joe Sammet, and I chose to keep Renee because he was kind of the guy who brought me to the party, and and Joe is like I said, actually fabulous guy. I'm sorry that occurred. Joe went to Krell. He went back east, moved back east, married Barbara, who had been our accountant, and the, this all these people come back after some period of time. Barbara is still with us. Joe, unfortunately, is no longer alive. Um, but anyways, he went back and began making Dan D'Agostino's operation very successful, and you can you can give uh, Joe Salmon a tremendous amount of credit for the success that was at Krell.
Mhm.
Um, Ultimately, he left Krell, and I would say maybe in the same sense that my leaving ESS was a foreboding of things to come. It, Krell became, I think, a little less successful as time went on, and of course, ultimately Dan started another company, uh, which, as far as I can make out, is doing just fine. Dan and I, by the way, are good friends. We don't actually talk a lot, but we've done favors for each other. We've never badmouthed each other, even though we're competitors. And he's a terrific guy, and he builds the most beautiful chassis I ever saw. And
And on your way to starting Past Labs in 1991, you spent time, was it working for ADCOM, or was that something that you also came up with another partner, or were you just consulting with them? I'm not quite sure on
well,
that.
our I was kind of a consultant, and when they had they'd gotten something going, and I knew Rob Ain already partly because he helped us in terms of getting some dealers connected back east. Oh, well, specifically, we shared reps in New York, and that was Ronnie Meyerowitz and Company, and they repped ADCOM, and they also repped us. And so when the ADCOM guys decided that they wanted to change directions in terms of what they were offering in terms of product, um, the Rob Ain at, let's see, what was the name of it? I forgot the name of the outfit, but Rob Ain talked to them and decided, that it would work for me to do the product for them, and so he kind of brokered that deal, and it became a multi-year set of projects that were very successful.
Mhm.
Well, not much to say. What is it? The 555 is apparently the largest quantity of products of amplifiers sold in history. I don't know that that's literally true, but I read it in a magazine. It was, however, tremendously successful.
Yep.
I should have taken a percentage, but on the other hand,
Hindsight.
I continued to do stuff for them for years, and we had a great relationship. So here I am with AdCom on the side, and I've got things going along. But Joe leaves the company, goes to work for Krell. A lot of stuff began falling apart there, and became a lot more difficult to the sales start lagging. Things occur, getting things done efficiently was not nearly so much. Um, and so that put financial stress on the company. And meanwhile, we got a very nice offer from Nakamichi. First off, they would like to do our distribution in Japan, and actually that was largely it. Plus, they and as part of that deal, they wanted also to have amplifiers designed for their product line. And so that deal was cut, and we got two things out of it. Well, if you count another product line with my name on it, you count three things. But one was cash, which we needed, and the other was a, a different distribution in Japan. Uh,
Mhm.
the distribution end of that didn't work out really as well as we had hoped. Um, in the end, we were actually uh, a company called Dynatech back east, which owned a number of quote high tech unquote companies. Audio was not considered high tech, but since it was electronics, I guess it was acceptable to them. And they were quite a large company, owning I don't know, maybe 20 companies, maybe more. It was they were a big outfit. They went private, and probably did better than ever. But the point was is that they came and made us an offer that we couldn't refuse with regards to cash. And it was the thing was is that it was supposed to remain the same people. Okay, we were still in charge. We're still doing what we want, and but we had access to as much money as we needed, and any other resources that the parent company could offer. They were terrific. Usually, you get these stories about buyouts, and management comes in and screws everything. New management comes in, screws everything up, makes the product awful, and begins dictating how it works and so on. Dynatech did none of that. They were absolutely wonderful. Um,
So what led to you at this point? You now have cash, you got support, you got all this, you know, this big company really supporting you. What led you to decide to go ahead on your own and start up Past Labs in 1991?
well, the we talk about what happens after you're acquired. Acquired. The fault was not with the parent company. They were, like I say, terrific. The fault was that one is we began hiring more people. Some of them had ambitions beyond being, functionaries. And in the end, we found ourselves what really amounted to an internal rebellion.
Mm.
And so finally, the parent company came and said, "All right, this is not working, obviously, because you guys aren't getting along. Why don't we just? We've got a really good sales manager. He's a good guy and a lot of experience. He had been at ESS, and why don't we just put him in charge, and then you're free to do whatever you want." And I'm going, it's getting really very attractive proposition at this point. So we went with that, and the whole thing went to hell quickly. The,
Mm.
the guy who was in charge uh, was not capable of doing it. He was just not. That was not within his tool set. And so it was all going to hell. And I at one point the crowd that were the people below me technically all stood up and said, you need to go. You just need to go. And I go, oh, shit, I'll go. I know how to do that. And so but by the time that happened, I already had uh, a small, a nice plot of land in Forest Hill with some really nice office and manufacturing and warehouse facilities that I had built during this time. And I just went, well, this is easy enough. I've already got everything that I need to start another company. And
Mhm.
so I did. Um,
And in your first projects, I know early on, was it early on that your supersymmetry topology that was in some of your earlier past lab amps? Is that correct? And was that something?
Supersymmetry was no that's past labs.
Yeah, right. But so did you have some when you started your new company under the name?
No, actually, the first thing that I did with past labs was the Aleph, and the first one of those was an Aleph Zero, which I have a nice pair of them here. They had been in the hands of Mobile Fidelity for years, years and years, and then they finally one day said, "Here, you can have your amps back now."
So was this a design that you had been thinking of or had already developed before you started up Past Labs, or was this something that once you started, you kind of put on your thinking cap and say, what can I do that's more innovative and a different design?
Well, that's always that part is always in play, but in this case, I wanted to I wanted to go full bore single ended Class A, and the Aleph Zero, which was the first example of that, was it was a single ended follower output stage biased by a big constant current source, and there it was. It ran hot as hell, and it put out I think 75 watts if my memory serves me, and it was very very it had no cosmetics at all. That is to say, um, it was a set of fins with a base and an on-off light and a switch in the back.
Right.
It was very unadorned. However, uh, back then, if you look around, there was Class A. There wasn't much action in that category. There were guys doing single-ended tubes, but they in a real sense they didn't count. They're in the segment all to themselves, but they were leading the way at least conceptually in that they were building simple single-ended circuits. I wanted to build the same sort of concept, but I wanted to do it with more power, and I wanted to do it with semiconductors. I also, when I left Threshold, I decided that I was no longer going to deal in bipolar transistors. Um, Partly it was kind of fed up with their limitations, but the other end of it was here's something completely different for me to do, and
Mhm.
they required that you develop yet another approach, a set of skills that or procedures that work with those kinds of parts instead of the bipolar, which are a different beast.
So,
So, pardon.
no, go ahead.
Oh, so I was building prototypes, and I recall one day I walked out of the office to talk to my. By then I had kids, and I actually had somebody who would tutor them after school, and give them a little of a boost, education wise. He was a terrific guy. So I'm out, go out. My lab was across the deck from my house, and then next to that was a shop, and next to that was a big steel building which held parts and where people could work also. Whereas the shop was, metal shop and wood shop. So I walk out there and leaving this amplifier running behind. Somebody said, "What's that smoke?" After, and I go running back, and the amp had caught fire and was burning away very nicely. Fortunately, it was in the middle of nowhere. And I on that particular circuit, I had to have heat sinks cooling my little transistors on the board. I had glued some nails to them and used the nails for heat sinks. And it turned out that didn't work really well. Um,
If
so,
you if you were if I can ask, if you were going to pick a couple of what would you say is your biggest innovations, either at Threshold or past labs in terms of circuit design or just things that you really that this was a real game changer? Are there a couple that you could mention off the top of your head that you think?
well, the original Class A was a game changer. Actually, it it altered a good chunk of the amplifier industry at the time because it became very popular with the Japanese as well. Subsequent to that, the Aleph. Um, well, let's see. I have to think sometimes. There's so many pieces.
I mean, I'm not an engineer. I have no background, but I read about things like the supersymmetry or your static induction transistors, or just some of these things that come up when people talk about your designs over the years. And as again, you can't pick your favorite child, but are there certain designs that you really particularly
Well,
proud of?
there were the non-switching designs. There were the stasis amplifiers, which broke some ground and I think had an influence in the marketplace. Um, Subsequent to that, the single-ended Class A's were my focus for quite a while. I think that it left an impression in the category. Um, Supersymmetry is has been extremely successful. I'm not sure who's stealing who's stealing any portion of that at this time. I don't,
Okay.
I'm blissfully unaware. Um,
It's a good place to be sometimes,
well,
especially.
my ambitions are really kind of limited. I want enough money for me, and I don't I don't have very expensive tastes. And after that, the thing is that when I was 15 years old, I was building stuff. That's what I like to do. That's still here. I am.
Well, with all this history and experience, Nelson, can you tell our members here your thoughts maybe on where you think the direction of high-end audio is these days and where it's going and what you see?
It's really interesting. I mean, um, there was a time when the tube guys were the standard. If you look at the beginnings of audio research and such, solid state had not taken much of a hold in the high end marketplace, but solid state displaced a very large chunk of the tube action. But tubes didn't go away. Um, what they did is that they morphed into something where they had more personality and deliberately so. If you and when we watch with solid state, uh, initially the emphasis is entirely on the power and the other specs, the distortion, the power, and the noise and the damping factor and the bandwidth. But these things were easily measured, and of course, they were far superior to the tube products in this regard. And yet, the market was bifurcated, and there were people who were just happy to stick with tubes, people who even went back to tubes. Um, where we are now is the conventional solid state is kind of where tubes were when when transistors showed up. And at this point, where we are is we are at the stage where Class D has arrived. Okay, and if you go and hang out at Audio Science Review, you will see people delighted in the notion that the things that they're measuring either do or do not do. Quadruple O, zero numbers for distortion and bandwidth halfway to daylight, and so on. And interestingly, the solid state, the Class D products are delivering on the goods. They have those specs. Um, so what I have seen is that that's taking a chunk of the market. And then over on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the tube guys, and then you've got me kind of in the middle. But I'm basically observing that the customer base that we deal in uh, is interested. Well, is kind of bifurcated into a, a group where they want higher power. Now, Class D will deliver that. There's no question. Some people don't care so much for a Class D. Some people simply think that the chassis in it is too small and it doesn't weigh enough, which I understand. But in the lower power spectrum, you've got people who are kind of people who also appreciate tubes. They're not hugely spec oriented. They like a little second harmonic with their music. They're not worried about the ultimate in bandwidth, distortion, damping factor. The numbers cease to mean something to these people below a certain level. As you go up market in terms of offering power, uh, those people are far more spec oriented, in my opinion. So that I find myself catering to, I personally cater it to the low power crowd. Um, if I've got, I don't know, 20, 30 projects at DIY Audio, all of them are low power stuff. I mean, I did a couple that were, oh yeah, they got up to 100 watts, but most of them are, 10-watt stuff. Some of them are 2-watt stuff.
Is this kind of where your first watt project kind of came out
Well,
of?
that was, yes. Well, Past, Past Labs was selling amplifiers with a decent amount of power, routinely more than 100 watts. And I mean, it got up to 600 watts, I think. Well, no, we had a 1 kilowatt. Yeah, we had a 1 kilowatt amp, um, which we haven't made in a while. But the thing was is that that action was well covered. We didn't have anything down in the zone where people who may just be graduating from tubes or have some of the kind of taste that's found in the people who like their tubes.
Mhm.
We weren't offering anything down in that category, and me that actually is the kind of thing that I find to be more interesting and fun than really big high power amps. I don't listen to anything very loud, and I still have my ears, but I've come to really appreciate not only the tube amplifiers, the few that I have, but also the little solid state Class A pieces that kind of mimic those characteristics. But they're all relatively low wattage. But I've got a pair of speakers here that I run that are 86, 87 dB efficient. they're 3.8 ohm load. They're not what we normally think of as friendly to little amplifiers. But in point of fact, I've got lots of little amplifiers that drive them just fine. And of course, again, I'm not trying to run a disco here. I'm just a normal guy listening at reasonable levels. And
Right.
Why people need that much power is beyond me. Although, of course, it's like any other thing. It's like the amount of horsepower that might be in a car. It may or may not really make the car that great. So, but I do see the market kind of drifting in that direction. A little more of a chasm between people who are happy with 10 watts, could be tubes, could be little single-ended Class A's, things like that, and guys who are after the power and the glory with regards to specsmanship and just raw power, or for that matter, cosmetics.
And at Past Labs, could you maybe speak a little bit about your process for research and development? When you and your team are thinking about a new project, whether it was a number of years ago going from the XA.5 to the .8s or whatever you might have coming down the line in the next 5, 6 years or so, what is the general process in terms of, do you just come up with a circuit and throw it out to the rest of your team saying, I'm thinking of doing this, let's start building some prototypes and we'll work on it over the next year or so? Or how does Past Labs go about developing a fairly different product line or a new circuit?
Well, first off, the other half of Past Labs development is Wayne. If it's a preamp, I mean, I initially in the old days I did, I did the preamp and this and that. Um, I forgot to bring it here, but I was going to show you my little Class D from 1980 that I built, and which I thought was broken. And then a few months ago, I went, oh yeah, well, let's see, maybe I can fix it. Turned out it wasn't broken; it ran fine. But it's just this little amplifier. But it was inspired by John Ulrich of Infinity, who you may recall back in the late 60s made a switching amp. Uh, anyways, uh, as far as development goes, though, Wayne is independent. He just simply, if it's a preamp or anything that looks like a preamp or a DAC, it's his territory, and he's responsible for a really big chunk of the company's business, and it's very successful. So we don't monkey with we don't monkey with Wayne. Um, I didn't mention it before, but I told you about how Joe Sammet went off and went to work for Krell and helped make them really successful. And then the day came that he and Dan apparently weren't getting along, and he moved back to California. And he calls me up and goes, uh, "Well, I'm coming back out to California. Uh, uh, Barbara, who's my accountant back in the day, who he married, is doesn't like the weather here in the winters anymore. She said, Joe, I'm going back to California. You can come with me or you can stay." So he decided to come back to California, and since she was based out of Sacramento, that's where they were landing. And I went and picked Joe up. I think I picked him up at the airport, and I was driving him back up to the area where we live. And I said, Joe, why don't you come back and join the company? I'll give you basically half the company. Well, I didn't give him half the company, but because there wasn't quite that much left. But he went, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that." Now that marked the day when all of a sudden Past Labs started becoming far more successful because he was this incredible marketer. He had also the best ears on the planet still. And so all the great things that he was doing for Krell, he was now doing for me. And unfortunately, Joe died.
Hmm.
He died. Uh, well, it's 10 years now. In fact, he was my age. Um, Most unfortunate. Uh, so now everybody has to work a lot harder.
Right.
But
From the start of,
the subject.
that's
So
okay.
going back to the subject at hand, Wayne does all the preamps. I don't even know what he does. I I I I have such it's like having Joe Sammet. Only in this case, he was developing electronics that were line level. Uh, Wayne is just totally impeccable, and so I've never had to second guess or even advise him on any of this. And I don't even review what he has. I just take a copy of it, hook it into my system, and I'm happy.
And what's the general time frame to develop a new product, whether it's a
Um,
pre or a new amp on your side?
Once we conceive of what it is we want, it probably gets into the order of it can be done in less than a year. If you look at it, we don't do any wild stuff with our chassis that's different. We might carve the faceplate a little differently, but the same basic set of heat sinks and stuff like that are kind of well set for us. And so in terms of the infrastructure of an amplifier, it's not totally problematic in that lots it's already there. Also, um, when Joe was at another case, when Joe was at Krell, he hired a kid from Ireland off the boat who was an engineering student and said, "Hey, you're a smart kid. How about I bring you on board at Krell to start doing the physical design, the cosmetics of the chassis and everything else that has to be carved and otherwise made that's not actually electronic as such." And that's when Krell's chassis started looking real good. So you can almost mark the day that Desmond was put on board. Well,
Hmm.
after Joe arrived and came and joined Past Labs, uh, amazingly, he talked Desmond into coming back, coming out to California. So Desmond joined the group, and he and Wayne also are stockholders, as is Joe's wife Barbara, who was our accountant once upon a time. Um, so Desmond, when Desmond arrived, he immediately what you saw with like the Aleph Zero and those other Alephs where they're all just heatsink and nothing else. Although I love those amplifiers. When Desmond arrived, he decided that we needed something new. We'd been selling those for some years. We needed something nicely attractive with a real faceplate and so on. And so everything that you have seen from us that is in the metal, whether it's a preamp or amp, for all these years since actually year 2 or 3, uh, that's all Desmond's work.
Okay.
He has since gone back to Ireland, but he's managing our end of the business in Europe. But on the other hand, he's also still doing all the design. And in addition to that, he actually trots back here, and I'm going to be seeing him next month, so he'll be out. But let's see. So he's a big chunk of that, but he's very independent of that. Wayne's very independent. All I have to worry about is the power amplifiers.
Okay.
And
So I have a couple questions. I'm going to have one more question, then I'm going to read some of the questions that some of our members have been sending in, if that's okay with you.
sure.
My last question for me is what's new and coming down the pike at Past Labs, either in amps or preamps, or do you have any products that you're working on that you can talk about, or at least give us an idea of what might be coming down in the next?
Unfortunately, the answer is no. Uh, we are
Well,
in fact working on stuff, but management back in I don't manage this company at all now. All I do is play in my lab,
sure.
and but they would be very upset if I let any cat out of the bag. Uh,
Well, how about just, is there anything new coming down the pike and
yes,
soon?
yes, and from both companies.
Yeah.
Well, we just released the SIT 5 that just got out, and the
Right.
SIT 4 was just prior to that. That you can see that's kind of thing we'll probably be doing with First Watt for a while. Um, in the case of the power amplifiers, I could well let me put it this way: we're always working on it,
Sure.
one way or another. I can't really wave my camera around real well, but I have several prototypes sitting around here. Now, what will happen here is that I'll get them done, polished up, and sufficiently in a shape that I think that people back at the factory can play with them. They go back and they will sit around the campfire listening to them and making adjustments and screwing around and comparing them to other things and coming back saying, this one's really quite good. This one needs a little help,
Some things never change.
Well, and I let a lot of other people do the listening as well. There's two reasons why. First off, other opinions are very good. I have my own, and it's not necessarily at the center of the market. The other thing too is actually we've got a couple of dealers that we bring into the equation also because they have known good taste in terms of evaluating. There you can find people who like something no matter what it is, but you're really looking for people who represent some kind of center of gravity in the marketplace.
Yeah, yeah.
The I was going to say, but we have had quite good luck with that in terms of people homing in on things. And there was one case where I had already signed off on something and said, yes, this is good. It's good enough. But I was listening with one ear and I had my other ear looking at an oscilloscope. And I went, okay, it seemed to me like the best balance between two worlds. And that was the F4. It had a nice spec, but it was using some feedback to get that. And I had it in a version which had no feedback. And I go, yeah, the distortion numbers are getting, even if it's second harmonic, the distortion numbers are getting out of hand. The guys at Audio Science Review won't like it at all. Of course, they won't like it anyways, but that's not the point. So everybody was happy with it. And but it sent it off to John Verhalen, Mr. Full Range, who's one of our dealers. And also there was not really a good consensus with the group. They had accepted the amplifier as is, but they weren't totally in love with it, which is not a good idea either. So John going, no, there's something missing about that, and I go, well, the only thing I can think of to do at this point is to yank the feedback. And so I said, John, all you have to do is clip this resistor out. You're good to go. And we did the same thing with the copy that were in the hands of the people back at the factory. And all of a sudden, the heavens parted, and they went, "Oh yeah, Jesus, this is 100% better. This is it." Well, that's what the F4 that's what shipped. I'm not the F4, the SIT4 that's what shipped. And there it is.
Yeah. Speaking of listening, one of our members wanted to know if you could, what do you listen to at home? What kind of system do you have?
Well, my speakers are tough speakers. I mean, I don't listen to things very loud, but if you were somebody who wanted to play loud music, you would find that they were challenged because they're 3.8 ohms, but it's a flat 3.8 ohms, and they're like 86, 87 dB efficient. So if you want to play them loud, you're going to have some wattage. But I don't listen loud, so it's not an issue for me. I can get by. I've got you may be familiar with the Beast of 1,000 JFETs. That is an array of JFET used as single transistor follower and operated Class A. It's just as cute as a bug. It only puts out a few watts, but it drives those speakers acceptably. My dogs are barking. Hold on a moment.
Sure.
I have a bassist turntable, which was actually gifted to me from A.J. Conti. And that's just an exquisite museum piece. Nothing else to say. The man was both an artist and a superb technician. No longer with us. And and a DAC that Wayne did back when we were doing DACs, when before the DAC crash of 19 whatever it was, and then we decided not to get into that market again. But I still use that. I've got two of those, and a pair of SR1s, which is a speaker that I designed along with Kent English. And now Kent's the guy who answers the phone at Past Labs, and we hired him. He was he was the operator of the cyclotron at Davis. He was the night operator. This was the cyclotron that they used in World War II.
I remember that. I remember that thing, that beast. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have some stories about that too, but
I can talk about the. Never mind.
Anyways, we hired Kent out of there. He's the one who answers the phone. One of our superb listeners, also.
So, do you listen mostly to analog or digital at home, and do you have feelings about digital versus analog in terms of music reproduction?
Well, I like analog. It's very charming. It's like a lot of things. It's like full range speakers, and which I'm not. I'm currently part of my problem at the moment is I have a nice room set aside just for full range speakers, and then there's the system upstairs which have the big SR1s. So that way I was getting the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, by virtue of having stored a lot of my stuff up in town here in a store, commercial storage outfit, I encountered an event where somebody ripped off the contents of one of my storage spaces.
Wow.
And took a tremendous number of loudspeaker drivers with them. Well, that was a loss unto itself, but it also meant that the other storage spaces in the same place were also probably in danger of being broken into. And I had my $1 million collection of semiconductors next door to that. So I lost a few $1,000s worth of drivers, but next door was, well, at today's prices, $1 million worth of transistors. And then, stuff elsewhere too. So I had to haul that stuff here to make it safe again. And my full range sound room is full of transistors and other things that I've had to rescue. And I'm currently trying to get organized around, getting my little sound room back, which is, as I say, the one I use for full range drivers, which I happen to have a particular affection for. Right. So right at the moment, if I'm doing any serious listening, it's on the SR1s. Now they are very accurate speakers. They're very flat. They're very low distortion. They were the most bestest drivers that Seaz made, and we put a tremendous amount of work into them so that when you measure them, they're just absolutely superb. But they are also they're very neutral in character, and they're a good test for amplifiers. And it's interesting because I enjoy 2 and 3 watt amplifiers being played on those because they do go loud enough for me, and and you can really hear things. Like, for instance, yesterday I put on some vinyl and I'm listening and I'm going, geez, that's not it. There's something wrong here. Maybe the electronics are screwed up or something else. It turned out that the cleaning lady had adjusted the tracking on my turntable, which is easily fixed. But those speakers would pull that right out, and you could go, wait a minute. This is not what I'm accustomed to hearing with this cut that I've heard 1,000 times. Right. And I keep what I call shortcuts on digital media. Usually just a solid state brick, and they've just been edited so that you're not having to listen to the whole tune. You can go through 20 cuts of different things that highlight different aspects, and not only that, but that collection is now, I don't know, 5-6 years old without change. So I get really used to how stuff is supposed to sound.
And which amplification? What amp are you using in your system? Or at
this instant, I have a pair of, if you know about the Beast with 1,000 JFETs, I also built a Beast with 500 JFETs
Okay.
per channel, a littler piece. And actually, at this very moment, I'm listening to those.
Okay.
I was sent a preamp. And those are just followers. So you got to have a source that swings the voltage. And I don't happen to have a source that swings that kind of voltage. The Past Labs preamps don't do that. And I never got around to building one, actually. But a friend of mine in Serbia built built an amplifier, built a preamp, and sent it to me. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. I wish I could show it to you. Uh, and I got it hooked up, and it delivers tremendous gain and swing, so that it'll drive follower stages all by itself. I don't need the complete amplifier. I only need the output stage. And yeah, I'm running it without feedback, but that's okay. You know, you evaluate it that way first. And so I'm actually doing quite well with regards to being able to listen to the amplifiers. Oh, the other thing that I'm running at the moment also is there's yet another version of the Beast, which is even smaller and is a 10-watt amplifier. But I can listen to that and I'm happy.
That's good.
So that's what's going on at the moment, and I'm spending a lot of time sorting through all the crap that has suddenly come into my living space, and also uh, actually giving stuff away to people that I know will put it to use.
Right. One of our members wants to know what other amps other than past lab amps or amps that you've built yourself, commercially available amps, what's out there that you like? And
Oh, I'd have to think about that. Um,
you like just the way they sound, you like
at the
the,
moment, I'm trying to think about what amps I have built by other people are here.
or you've heard the shows, or the designers, and things that
Well,
you.
I haven't been to shows in, I don't know, 10 years maybe.
Okay, fair enough.
Um, but let me think. The only other examples I have of things that I didn't build are things that other DIYers built and sent me.
Okay.
And I have a couple. I have a couple of older amplifiers from the old days. But once again, those are mine. Honestly, I guess well, like I said, I have several that are DIYers built. Um, who builds good amplifiers out there? In my estimation, well, there's a lot of really great product. Um, I don't have any argument with anybody with regards to uh, if they have whether their product is good or better or not. There is such a range of taste associated with the audiophile population that you I don't have any reason to use any references other than just what I play with. Um, like I said, yeah, actually, my play toys are all the DIY stuff for the most part. And I'll, but I've got, I have, um, I'm trying to think, brain fart here. I have about at least half of the amplifier of the Past Labs product here, the current stuff.
One of our members wants to know your thoughts about some of the Chinese knockoffs of clones of your amps, and does that really either piss you off or you're flattered by it?
Well, first off, I always explain, gee, they spelled my name right. It's a sign of success when people are ripping you off. So that on one level, that's and honestly, I don't think that there's all that many people who would actually be confused by this. Um,
Well, it doesn't bother you. It doesn't upset you.
and I have people copying and or commercially putting out versions of a lot of my DIY stuff. Um, Once again, I basically I've already made enough money. I mean, I don't have that as a goal at this late date. Um, Mostly, I'm trying to just enjoy myself with my project, still building my toys, and,
Mhm.
and listening to them and going, well, how about that? Mostly I have a lot of fun when something that shouldn't really be very good still is. And there's some excellent examples of that. These little JFET arrays. Here's an example of one that's just sitting here right now. This was something that was going to be one channel of a headphone amp, and got severely damaged in shipping. But the little arrays of JFETs are at this instant what I'm playing with most. But I also
Kind.
bought I also bought
You
a
hang up from
large
this thing.
sampling of every silicon carbide transistor that I could get out of distribution, and with the uh, intent of running them all through their paces so that we can see which ones do what that we want. Which ones are easy to use and have low distortion and are reliable and all that, etc. I have a large inventory of the big token SITs. I mean, a really large inventory of those, and that's going to fuel SIT amplifiers for first watt for years and years.
One of our members wants to know your thoughts on Class AB amps versus Class A amps. Do you have a much?
Well, what can you say? They're efficient. Um, we there are actually now some products out there where they have a switch on them that you can go A or AB for when if you're listening to background music or you're just running a disco or something like that. AB is a totally acceptable approach, and Class A is for when you invite all the audiophiles over
I think you've made your point.
for a listening session. And we build some product that caters to that already, and I think we're going to probably do more of that in the future. But these are things that are still under development.
One of our members, this is kind of a personal question, not personal, but he says he owns a pair of XA 100.5s for many years, and he wanted to know when you thought they might need to have their caps replaced or looked at.
Well, when the day comes that you're hearing buzzing out of the speakers, you know that you've arrived on that. Um, as a rule, these caps last quite a long time. Uh, of the examples that didn't last as long and needed replacement were some of the early first watt amplifiers. We really worked them hard, and it wasn't actually that the caps failed. It was that it was hot enough that the heat shrink sleeve on the cap would continue to shrink because it's a heat shrink, and there was a cap that it was holding on top of the capacitor, this little plastic cap that was held by this sleeve, and as the sleeve contracted, the cap popped off, or began to bulge from the tension. And people going, "Oh no, my cap's exploding!" No, actually, it's just a piece of plastic. Um, but I believe we probably replaced a few of those. But I have had rarely cases where the amp just ran hot for a long, long time in an environment that was probably kind of warm. Um, and I've got some old threshold amps, the cans that we were using there. I have seen examples of, for instance, stasis. I have a pair of stasis ones here that a friend of mine has brought to me for. He actually got some mechanical damage in somebody transporting the amplifier, but uh, but he was concerned about the caps and so on. And that amplifier is what, I don't know, 30 something years old. Um, So I pulled the caps and I tested them, and they were perfect. And I'm just going, people worry too much about the capacitors, really. Um, even when they're new, they worry about their capacitors. But as a rule, if you stick with the name brands and you don't run them shy of their ratings, and you're not in a too hot environment, it's they have quite a long lifespan. Uh, those were 30 years old, and I saw nothing wrong with them at all. The less expensive, those were the big cans from well, old classic types, the 30-year-old kinds of product. Nowadays, we're using banks of smaller capacitors because that's pretty much what distribution has available at a reasonable price. Um, they hold up, and so I, I I'm not in the loop in terms of what numbers of amplifiers come back to past labs with the guy wanting them recapped. But it's often the case that they just go, well, it's been 10 years or 20 years. How about if I recap? And we go, you can do that. It doesn't cost a fortune. And if it makes you sleep better at night, great.
Sure.
But as a rule, the real indicator is if you're starting to hear hum, but actually not hum but buzz at the speaker that you didn't hear before, then it's time.
Okay, fair enough. One gentleman said that he recently bought a integrated 60 and he's never had separates. And his question is, what do you think is the most notable difference between something like an integrated unit where you might have really shorter paths, but again, everything is in one chassis versus advantages or disadvantages of having a fully separate system with monoblocks and a separate preamp and everything, with their own power supplies? Do you think there's this day and age with the kind of design that you get that much improvement, everything else being equal power wise, with something like an INT 60 versus total separates of the same amount of power?
Well, I, I don't have any argument with what I see in the products that we look at out in the marketplace today. The few that come across my bench or that I've otherwise seen know people who are using them, they seem fine. They don't those kinds of products. They're not catering to either people who are looking for the power and the glory because they want to play it really loud or if they're not trying to drive very low impedance loads because I have some nice examples of stuff that gets down into the 2 ohm and below region, and then there's this there's just a middle ground of people who are trying to be reasonable about this and not spend a fortune. Those products are great. They're reliable. I don't know of any. I can't think of a brand that I could say, oh, that's not good. I wouldn't, anyways, of course.
I think my question was more, do you think there's inherently anything better about separates versus integrated amps? Integrated amp where the preamp and the amp are in one box versus a separate where the preamp is separate from the amplifier.
Well, in the end, it's the ability to mix and match that is part of the charm of being an audio crazy. Uh, you know, trying different amplifiers, trying different products. You can, of course, do that with an integrated, or even something that's got a receiver. It's got the tuner built in and the phono stage. And I mean, you can go to town. After all, that was the standard for product for many years. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. But the difference between that and the guy who is out shopping for a particular you know a particular type of amplifier, and he's tired of the Class D that he's got there, and he's going to try a Class A over here, or maybe a more powerful or less powerful. It's actually part of the entertainment, and in the end, we have to recognize we're in the entertainment business here. We're not feeding starving children, as Samet used to say. And so to me, I build amps that, like I say, have actually would be considered a fairly high degree of distortion if you're going by the measurements compared to the other things that you can get. What you do see is that if you're buying an integrated from somebody, it's very likely that you're going to be dealing with people who are shooting for the better specs. In other words, it's from a market analysis end of it, these are companies that are a little less worried about the exact sound that they might be aiming at, and making sure that it delivers the power for a spec, and the distortion numbers and bandwidth for a spec.
Do you think that holds for past labs? I mean, if you were gonna, if money is not an option and someone was gonna either buy one of your really top-notch integrated amplifiers with the preamp and amp in one box versus buy a separate preamp and a separate amplifier or separate mono blocks, do you think power being the same, do you think there's going to be much of a difference in terms of the quality of the sound and distortion, from an audiophile standpoint? Do you think there's much difference between the two, integrated versus separates within your company?
No, but only in the sense that we wouldn't develop a separate amplifier circuit for an integrated.
Right, it'd be the same.
Basically, it would be a circuit that we're probably already using, and somebody would say, Wayne, can you shoehorn a preamp into this? And Desmond, can you come up with a faceplate that supports all that? That's how it would be likely to occur.
Yeah.
And so, is it going to be particularly different? I don't think so. You usually you can tell the seriousness of whatever we're doing by the size of the heat sinks, because that's very, very proportional to the amount of power we're burning, and we're not here to burn power needlessly. So that if it's if it's got big heat sinks, it either means that it's got 500 watts, or or maybe it's only 100 watts, but it's Class A. That's the kind of aspect that you can see. So anything that we do like that it's going to follow that pattern. In terms of sonic differences, all of the all the current amplifiers, as far as I'm aware, have literally the same. The XA25 sits on its own pedestal in this lineup, but everything else is the classic front end for the supersymmetric that we've been using year and year and year after, because we're so happy with it. And then also there's a standard output stage format for what we're doing on our current product line. You can put some little wrinkles in it occasionally, but I would say that they're not really substantial. Mostly what we're doing is taking a basic design and stretching it and fitting it into different categories of what we're looking to do. They do differentiate between the Class A and the Class AB, but in point of fact, it's just the bias number.
Okay. One gentleman asks, any thoughts on Dave Burning, your East Coast counterpart?
Pardon?
Any thoughts on David Burning? He said he's your East Coast counterpart, Dave Burning.
Well, because he's probably the guy we think. But I don't know David personally, but if he has an attitude that's like mine, then it would be something along the lines of, excuse me. I build what sounds good to me. I and I don't let arbitrary information, presume to be the thing that upon which the decisions get made. It's specifically the specs. I just run into so many things that perform so well, but then for some reason or other don't meet the criteria for high quality reproduction. And my favorite example of that is just the thing with the second harmonic. The tube guys got it straight. They have a pretty nice picture of what second harmonic, even the phase of second harmonic, sounds like. It's real consistent between people I've discussed it with and who have their own observations. You got some second harmonic, it tends to sweeten the whole thing up. It tends to warm it up. If it's out of phase second, which is different than positive phase second, the out of phase second tends to deepen your perception of an image. And I once upon a time I speculated that maybe what we're really looking at is a sensory mechanism that is sensitive to whether the tiger is approaching you versus the tiger is going away from you. A valuable trait if you have it. Um, Second harmonic in negative phase is something backed off from you a little bit, and second harmonic in positive phase is something that's just a little more in your face. It's a subtle thing. I've encountered people who like it one way versus the other, but not agreeing which one that is. My experience is that negative phase second, if that's the form of distortion that you've got, is the one that people will prefer if they prefer that at all. Um, that's interesting because the first watt, I just go straight for that. It's it's my toy company. Actually, it's owned by Past Labs, but it's my toy company. I get to do what I want, and the negative phase second is so popular that I make sure that I'm always offering something fits into that zone, and I do it deliberately. And I can put a pot on these circuits and trim it out, or trim it to be positive phase. In fact, I've got something actually in artwork. The artwork I was working on when I missed my calling here on this call is a real simple thing where you put in a transistor and you got a knob and you can hook it up just without fear. It'll run, and you get to listen to those things and measure them if you like. But it's like just pop them in. And I bought a whole bunch of silicon carbide transistors for the occasion, two of everything. I'm going to have fun with this because it's something that you can play with. So I like low distortion also. That doesn't, I don't have a problem with that. It's just that I'm kind of interested in the effects. And since hardly anybody in the solid state realm is actually playing with this sort of thing, then what I offer tends to be a little more unique than what else is out there. It does the bigger power amps, not so much. Guys who want lots of power and high damping factors, they want the control and stuff. This isn't the crowd that goes, "Oh yeah, nice second harmonic." No, it's
Right.
the guys who are buying a 10-watt single-ended are going, that's what I like. Two different customers.
Right. One gentleman asks, is the XA25 the big brother to the first watt? Is that a fair
No,
enough?
no, it's not. It's actually a standalone piece. I wanted, as everything has got an excuse for its existence. Uh, One of the observations that I've made too is that square law semiconductors, square law parts, FETs specifically, enjoy if you are often the parts are degenerated with a resistor. If it's a transistor, if it's a FET, it's a resistor on the source. If it's a tube, it's the resistor on the cathode, and so on. That lowers the gain, but it also lowers the distortion, so that um, you get better specs without having to use any feedback. The thing is that it alters the spectral composition of the transistor going through the path that it traverses of voltage and current, and so it becomes different when you degenerate with a resistor. And there are those people who love their triodes partly because they often are not degenerated. That's one of those things that the tube people have kind of glommed onto. Um, this is also true. It doesn't work so much for like bipolar devices, but it really does a nice job on FETs if you take that away. And you're looking at more of a square law character, more of a triode-like character by lack of not having the degeneration. So you undegenerate these parts and you get some interesting things. The gain goes up. You could take that gain and use it in feedback or not, as you like, but it picks up a different character.
So is the circuit of the XA25 significantly different than from some of the other power amps that are currently, that you designed that are out there versus?
Yes. Well, in this case, it's undegenerated. The
Okay.
output stage has no resistance in series with the sources of these big FETs that we put in. These are big ESS MOSFETs.
So in terms of what you hear, everything else being equal, Nelson, in terms of what you hear, if you put, you're playing, you're sending it from the preamp into the XA25 versus something like the XA30.8 or something, right? In terms of tonally, in terms of the way it presents music, the fact that it's not degenerated, what does that do in terms of how you perceive the
It,
sound?
in the simplest way, it becomes more live. I mean,
Okay.
it starts being, having more personality that you can relate to sonically. um,
Hmm.
it's really interesting. You can see it in the spectral content of the distortion. There is there's more. The degeneration lowers the overall distortion, but it leaves it in a more complex state. Is pretty much what the argument is. But undegenerated, you get more gain. If it's a follower, its output impedance is lower. If it's not a follower, gives you something that you could use for feedback if you like, or just simply lower distortion by virtue of having a lower output impedance. That's part of that. That's part of that whole picture.
Hmm.
So the XA25, I wanted to build an undegenerated output stage. Now, normally you don't fool with that because the parts wander with temperature. So, and with bipolar, if you didn't have those resistors on the emitters, it would burn up quickly. I mean, it would just take off and off you go. With MOSFETs, less so. It's not such a problem, but it's still there, and you're still using some value of source resistors to keep it stable. if if you can control that without the resistors, in other words, if you can set the bias circuit up so that it knows what the static current is and maintains that figure without having those emitter in source resistors, then you've eliminated the degeneration, and the sound it just simply comes out. It's more live. It's more alive.
Have you ever thought about using that same technology to build a pair of like monoblocks or, you know, have you
Well,
doing that in other amplifiers?
what I did with the XA25 is if you're not paralleling FETs, then you only have to deal with one transistor's character, and so you don't have to worry about those elements. And I used real big IXIS power MOSFETs for these rather than multiples of smaller MOSFETs. These are the hockey puck pieces are in the XA25, and I developed a circuit which sensed the bias, not just the current going through the output stage, which it senses the output stage bias as if it were only reading it with it just set in a static situation without any current going to the load. In other words, it emulates it creates a situation where the bias the bias that's applied is constant, but it also it accommodates the fact that the output device's parameters are changing. The bias voltage that it needs is different second by second. So that was really successful. It's a nice circuit. Probably should have patented it, but I stopped patenting stuff years and years ago.
You think you'll put that into other devices or the XA25, you did
Well,
it, you're done
it
with it?
works. It works really well if you have one big fat transistor. You can have a complementary pair of big fat transistors. Okay, a P and an N. But if you're paralleling devices to get the power figures up, it becomes a big pain in the butt.
I see. Okay.
So it's one. So it's the kind of case where it works really well with one really big substrate in a big package. The XA25 has that.
Fair enough. So I have a question here from Stephen, who's one of our one of our illustrious members. Stephen, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question to Mr. Pass?
Actually, I just want to mention a couple of things. Nelson, I met you almost 45 years ago in Davis when you did one of the mod of the Harman Kardon Citation 12 with the MOSFETs, Bob Stone's house. You came for an evening and you played that wonderful amplifier for us, and we had a wonderful evening listening to music. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you, for these little wonderful AmpCamp amps. Folks can build these for $349 or so each. I have two, Nelson, that I run as bridged monos, and they're absolutely wonderful. They're Class A, 15 watts, when bridged monos. And I also have one of your little Zenductor amps that you shared with us at AmpCamp 2 years ago, or a year ago, roughly. So I just want to thank you, Nelson, for all of your contributions to us over the years. I really love playing with these. And, your experience and knowledge and wisdom has really contributed a lot to our society. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well,
Thank you.
well, thanks for that. I have to say, that's what I love to do. It's just build toys and give them away. Because the DIYers are just a terrific crowd. I mean, the site, DIYaudio.com, I've been on a bunch of sites, and this is the one where it really is fun to be a member of that community. It's a really good crowd. You don't have issues with people who are unpleasant or off the topic. And the best part about it is that it's really fun for me to create something. Sometimes they're really great, sometimes not so great, but they're interesting. And interesting is really is fine by me. I enjoy that sort of thing. And you can do these things. And then the other thing that you can do by virtue of publishing it and or offering a full or partial kit through the store is people build it. And there is no greater satisfaction than building your own piece of equipment and then having a good listen to it and then starting on the next one.
Just one last little comment. There was a thread in the DIY forum when I built my AmpCamp amps where one of the double E's posted somewhat of an upgrade to resistor values, and he also specified V-shaped bulk metal foil resistors rather than standard classic metal film resistors. And I did that when I built mine. They're just wonderful sounding amps. So thank you so much again.
Yes, thank you for this wonderful Zoom. My question to you is the difference between a cheap amp versus very expensive amp, spec-wise or sound-wise or whatever. Can you elaborate?
There will be differences. You know that the expensive one's going to have a real thick faceplate, and so on. The thing is that there's such a wide range of taste that and needs and desires on the part of audiophiles that there's no assuming that something works. There's no telling who's going to think that that's the best that for them. And happiness is all we want to see here. That's like I said, there's nothing else going on in this industry except that people like music. They like to participate in listening to the music. They like to play with the methods by which they get their reproduction. And I'm not here to argue about it because that I understand that. That's how I am. I get a kick out of playing with all this stuff and noting the differences. And it's got to be a pretty bad amplifier before I don't enjoy checking it out and having a good listen to it. And I do that whenever I try to cobble things together quickly here so that I can go upstairs and hook them up to the tough to drive speakers. And sometimes you go, well, it's not really there. Sometimes though you go, it's amazing how good it is considering that it's really a crappy little amplifier. Don't know.
Does Past Labs, the facility up in Auburn, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a listening room, or do you ever allow people to come up and tour if we wanted to look up?
There's no listening room there.
Okay.
The people who do the listening there haul stuff home and occasionally do it as a group.
Okay. Okay.
But
Fair enough.
no, actually, we've never had a listening room. Not since the days of Threshold.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions in the group? Because we're just about on 2 hours, so I'm going to move towards winding this up. I mean, we could go and go and go, but I think to be fair to you, Nelson, I think 2 hours is great. We do have another question here. John H., you have a question?
So switch mode power supplies have gotten mature. There's a lot of designers that are actually designing quote unquote good ones now. Are you interested in looking at that in your designs at all?
I use them myself. The DIY stuff, which I spend a lot of time with. The DIY stuff is all switchers, because I'm not eager for to have people building their own amplifiers and hardwiring the AC line. Just there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes in that territory. On the other hand, at the same time, there's some really nice switchers out there. And if you want to spend a little more money than on the extra cheap ones, you go with an outfit like Meanwell. Meanwell is my go-to. They're reliable. They're quiet. They're fine. Now, I always throw a little bit of filtering on after them, because there'll be a little bit of radio frequency and other bits of noise. they're pretty quiet, but they're not audiophile quiet. But then no power supply that I've seen is until you treat it with some filtering. And I like passive filtering. Just a nice RC network does the job. A couple of ohms and then a few thousand mics to ground will take out the stuff that the switcher does. But the switcher, the other thing about it is your AC line goes up and down. The switcher's output does not. It holds it rock steady. So there are actually some advantages over your classic analog versions of that. So especially though, if you're doing your own stuff, if you can go with a switcher, I think you're better off. And then when you give it away to somebody, you can be assured that they're not going to give themselves a shock with it either.
Hey,
Any other questions?
I've got one.
Sure.
You've talked a lot about sound quality, and I really appreciate that. I think specs are not everything. I have no experience with Class D amps. You've spoken about them a bit today, and certainly lots of people have been talking about them. And I'm wondering if you have opinions on sound quality Class D versus Class A.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. Class D literally delivers lots of power. It does so with low distortion, a high damping factor, and a reasonably high bandwidth. If you just want to listen to music, as a rule, Class D is just fine. The other categories these days now move into people where they're asking something more specific. Now, like I said, the Class Ds that I've listened to I regard them as good. You listen to them, I'm not hearing any problems, but at the same time, they don't quite do it for me. I'm always looking for just it's just a little more, and it may in fact be distortion of some sort, or sometimes it is posited that Class A has got some form of distortion that we haven't measured yet or that we're ignoring. That's a real possibility. I have a Class D here that I did, as I said, way back in the dark ages, and it works, unbelievable. But it actually does work. Gordon Holt heard it and thought it sounded good. I hooked it back up recently, and I was damn, it sounded good, but I knew what I was listening to, and my brain was really saying, "Yeah, it really, really is excellent considering." So, I don't know. Mostly I encourage people to play with something, try different things, pick the one that makes you happy. When you're tired of it for whatever reason, you'll find it easier to pick the next one because there's qualities that you either are feeling like you're not quite missing, or the flaws that are bothering you. You'll have already trained yourself, even if it's only as a negative. I'm I, I listen to everything and I enjoy everything, even the bad stuff. So I'm not necessarily the guy to ask. All I can say is that we because it's commercial product, we really make an effort to try to please the kind of specific audience that we perceive that we have, and actually I think we're pretty good at that, and without pretending to try to make everybody happy.
That great answer. Thank you. Well, with that, I think I'm going to wind things up. Thank you so much, Nelson, for
Well,
spending.
thank you. You guys are great.
I really appreciate you spending your time with us and talking
Well,
about.
like I said, it's a pleasure. I like to toot my own. Here I am in my cave day after day. I don't get that much social.
Well, we'll have to do this again sometime.
Okay.